Well, we were talking about when I said private space is kind of a misnomer.
Yeah.
That, in a sense, everything has always been private space because, Boeing built part of stuff, and McDonnell Douglas built part of stuff. And it was private companies building stuff that then the government did. The thing the shift that's happening right now is a difference between cost plus contracts. Here, guys, throw some money at you. Go do something. Oh, we didn't like that. Here's some more money. Do it again. That may be kind of cynical, but it seems like a lot of the ways that things go. Sometimes it's because we don't know what we're doing and we're researching things, and sometimes it's, hey, we built what you wanted, and you changed your mind.
And in the Apollo days, that was kind of needed because they didn't know what it was going to cost.
Nobody knew what they were doing. And then,
but now we have a decent idea for certain things.
And so you look at the contract, the commercial operation transport system. Is it system? Anyway, COTS.
COTS, yeah, commercial transportation system.
What SpaceX and Orbital are doing, taking supplies to the space station. That was, you hit this benchmark. We agree you hit this benchmark. You get some money. And here's how much money you're going to get. Can you do it for that much money? Oh, okay.
You can, awesome.
Now, if you make some money off of that, good. If you lose money off of that, we don't care. We're not giving you any more money.
What's that sound like money ball?
It does. You want door number one, door number two, or door number three. And now, of course, I'm kind of partial to SpaceX because I love a company that has a Dragon engine on a Falcon rocket with a Dragon capsule, and their first flight, they took a wheel of cheese because they are fans of Monty Python's cheese shop bit.
Yep.
I've always wondered where that cheese went, but I suspect there was some private space, some private investing cheese and wine.
I think they actually cased it in Lucide.
Yeah, they did.
Did they?
I was gonna say that I was in LA back in October, just watch Endeavor go across the streets and stuff like that. It was pretty epic. The commercial where they're towing it over. I'm technically in that commercial. I'm in that crowd. On that dot, exactly. But we actually did, because of somebody, we got to tour SpaceX. It was, unfortunately, I couldn't take pictures, typical stuff, but it's ITAR and stuff like that. But
Isn't that ridiculous?
yeah, I know. That's another topic.
There you go.
Might need a whole day. Might need a whole day for that.
ITAR.
But he showed me the guy who showed me the cheese that they had there. It's kind of it's on display. I think it's right next to the die-cast model of Iron Man.
Because they use that in they use their factory for
and Elon was in on that. And they based a lot of the character off of Iron Man too, off of Elon. So, but with them, there for the longest time I thought they weren't ever going to get anything done because they said you were saying. I think what you were saying that it's always 10 years away. Oh yeah, exactly.
SpaceX was supposed to launch Falcon 1 out of Vandenberg. And, we're not ready. We're not ready. What, this 2 years after they were supposed to launch their first one, we're still not ready. Well, apparently part of the problem was the Air Force was having problems with another launch site, and they didn't want Falcon going over top of it because they had something sitting on that pad. And so they finally moved them all the way out to, which I did not know we had until then, the Kwajalein Ballistic Missile Test Range out in the Western Pacific.
I think it might be named after Ronald Reagan, too.
And and there's a section that's the Ronald Reagan Ballistic Test Range. And basically, what are they, about 10 feet above sea level?
If that. And that was actually a big problem with their first launch. Because, again, new company, brand new, they're still young. They didn't think about the salt corrosion.
Yes.
That was a big problem with their first launch.
Well, and what they're talking about is, I was lucky enough to see the webcast of that.
Me too. Until they cut it off.
Well, when you abort, there's no more picture. They cut away some of the jungle. They put a concrete slab there, and as it launches, some of the leaves whip around and splat right onto the camera lens, and they get what was it, about a minute and a half before the abort. They used the most expensive stainless steel fittings in that engine because they thought, most expensive, that's got to be the best. Unfortunately, they're very susceptible to the salt corrosion, so some of the fuel leaked. The engine caught on fire internally. The system went, there's a fire, so they shut down the engine. In retrospect, they may have been able to fly with that fire going because it wasn't affecting thrust. It wasn't affecting it wasn't coming out and causing it to twist or anything. They might have flown to fuel exhaustion and never burned anything up important, but they didn't know that. Brand new. So a minute and a half and then to the ocean. And then, but they got to the third one still well.
The third one was an accident.
Yeah.
they put the new engine in, and it was regeneratively cooled. I can't speak today. And they forgot to add in a few extra seconds for that residual fuel to go through those lines, and basically they rear-ended themselves with the first stage and the second stage.
Yeah, the first
fairing.
Yeah, exactly.
And so and there was a lot of thought at the time that third time's the charm, and if we don't make it, we're done.
Mm-hmm.
And Elon comes out and says, "Hey, we came so close, we're going to do it again."
In a month.
The
turnaround time was amazing.
Mm-hmm. And that's part of the reason that part of their original funding, is been the Air Force, because that's kind of the holy grail for the Air Force.
Mm-hmm.
We got a mission. We want to fly it now. We don't want to say in 2 years we're going to do something. We want to. We lose some kind of capacity in orbit. Instead of waiting 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years to get some replacement up there, we want to do it today, this week, which is part of the reason why they're still flying the mini shuttle. Because they want capabilities that are almost instantaneous and not having to wait. Say they funded several of those early Falcon flights, and of course that's why it's Falcon 1 and Falcon 9. Same engine, 1 engine, 9 engines.
Mm-hmm. Except they went away with that for the Falcon Heavy.
Yes.
You can't call that the Falcon 27. No. That's going to be awesome. That launches too.
Yeah.
But I think what you're kind of talking about is, they're refreshed, new.
Yes.
And
learning
lessons, learning curve, big time.
Now,
Orbital
is a different story. They've been around forever, not as long as Boeing, and of course it used to be McDonnell Douglas. But they went a different route. Somebody discovered a few years ago, and the way it was described to me, that during the Soviet effort to go to the moon, they designed the N1 and these engines to fly it, kind of their equivalent to our Apollo engines. Well, they didn't have very much success with that rocket. They pretty much wiped out a good section of their people when one exploded. Well, the Soviet Union didn't like embarrassment, so they were to destroy every one of the engines. Somebody said, "Nah, put them in a warehouse." So these are, moon engines for the Soviet space program being refurbished and put into a new rocket to make Orbital's resupply vehicle.
Antares. Yeah.
and Cygnus. They love the names, don't they? And, now, Dragon is different from Cygnus in 2 ways. One is it was always designed as eventually being a human-rated vehicle and to put people in it. And Cygnus is simply a supply vehicle. So it had more volume than Dragon does for getting things to the space station.
They're doing a test flight on Wednesday
Yeah, I don't
Or
know.
is it just the rocket?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Again, it's one of those things. They're always, in this particular case, always a few months away. But SpaceX was that way too before their first launch.
And
So
see,
you
this
gotta
is
give them
like
time.
what 2 years beyond
Oh yeah,
what they
it's a
thought
delay. Yeah.
because they couldn't get the plumbing right on the launch pad. Because you don't think about that, but there's a lot of plumbing on the launch pad to get the fuel and the oxidizer into the spacecraft, into the rocket, and it seemed like there was just one construction problem after another, and that was the final thing, was the plumbing. They couldn't get the plumbing right. Now wait a minute, guys. Shouldn't be something that is unknown and new. That should be coming down pat. But they are finally, and that wasn't them. That wasn't Orbit. That was the people at the spaceport deciding on this stuff. Yeah. And so they're going to, like you said, maybe next week. That's going to be exciting too. And they have tested those engines quite a bit, so I don't expect the engines to be a problem. As opposed to what was it, not the last Dragon, Falcon flight.
The one in October, yeah.
That lost one engine and still
which proves its
mission.
robustness. That's the key right there. People keep, SpaceX lost an engine. They did that wrong. Oh no.
Mm-hmm.
And all the critics,
But I don't know. Did you read the article about how the Air Force helped SpaceX?
Oh, I did read that.
thrusters?
Yeah, they used their satellite network and stuff like that.
Because they weren't. One of the problems with all, and not just Dragon, pretty much every satellite capsule or anything that goes up, at a certain point you have to be able to aim the antennas to talk to whatever you're going to talk to.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you've seen the movie Apollo 13 again, they discuss that aspect in the movie, that as it's making the wild gyrations and they're trying to control it, that they're losing contact with Earth, being able to, because the antennas are not pointed right any longer. The same thing happened to SpaceX. They got up there, the pressurization system did not work right. They had one set of thrusters, not all four sets. They couldn't get themselves into position to talk to their network. So the Air Force used their equipment, which is more power. You can overwhelm bad aiming with more power. And so they uploaded a set of instructions that, as I understand it, built up pressure on the wrong side of the valves that then caused the valves to kick back and forth, and they finally opened. And it's because the manufacturer changed something, and they weren't aware of it.
Is that what it was?
I
didn't read that part.
They said that's why one worked and three didn't.
Yeah.
Because
so
the one was the old batch and the three were the new batch.
It has nothing to do with SpaceX then?
No, it wasn't SpaceX, other than they did not run a high-pressure test.
Fair enough,
They ran a low-pressure test.
But that is...
They will run a high-pressure test next time.
I'm sure they will. That was it was a slight embarrassment, but at the same time, one thing people have to take out from it is, in a crisis, they figured the problem out and they got it done and went on with the mission. 100, as far as I know of, after that, 100% success.
You never learn anything if it always goes perfectly.
Absolutely, In fact, I wanted to make mistakes.
You build up your credibility by being able to recover.
That's the same thing with the engine out 6 months ago. That proved that you can lose an engine.
And the problem on the first run of it.
Oh yeah, exactly.
All of a sudden, it was blinded by ambient light, and so they changed the parameters, and then it could see where it needed to go, so to speak.
Digital glasses.
That's real technical.
Yeah.
But in that aspect, again, that was one of those things where I was lucky enough to be watching the streaming video. You listen to them, and you can't tell it isn't, mission control.
Oh no.
You get in. I think if you're going to be successful, you're in that mindset. That's why mission control was successful, because that you get into a mindset of you try to eliminate every possibility of having a problem, and then you're in a position to deal with the problems as they come along. And now, of course, mission control is table after table with laptops on it instead of consoles and everything. They still get the same job done, and you listen to them, and it's just cool and professional, like what you want.
Exactly.
And so it's amazing in that they are so, and they've been so open and above board, and they have taken that approach, like with the, unfortunately, it bites them sometimes, like, they buy these valves and they don't work, and they buy these fittings and they rust in the salt, and things like that, and what got me on the first Falcon 1 was it was the most expensive fittings. It wasn't the cheapest fittings. They weren't cutting corners.
Yeah, exactly.
They went with the best bit them. They had gone down to a level below those. Those were more salt resistant than the fancy stainless steel ones.
And also it has to do with the fact that they had designed it for Vandenberg and not for the Middle of the Pacific.
And it was based, and we're talking about, we're into this new era where we're past the learning all the new, the basic new stuff, things that just were totally unknown, and so things are so much more known now. They based the first engine off of the fast track engine that NASA had already developed, and so they're way beyond that now. But everything's kind of built on what went before, and in the case of that, they make trade-offs. Strangely enough, not Space.com, but a welding magazine. But it was a link from SpaceX to this welding magazine because they were proud of what the article was saying, and rightly so. There is a method called stir weld.
Yeah.
And they stir weld on these tanks instead of the fancier welding that is typical, because stir welding isn't as light, but it's a lot quicker, therefore less expensive, and so they're making a trade-off. They're not going with the traditional approach of we'll get every ounce out of the vehicle we can. If we have a 1% penalty in weight, but we still get more than 99% of the effect, why spend the extra money? And or maybe we'll just crank up that engine just a touch more. So this is where so much of this stuff is now, is the baseline is so well known that they can do the trade-offs and help reduce the cost.
Which is what they're doing with the Grasshopper design. So.
Which was that one where we were showing in the video.
That was the most recent Grasshopper hop, per se.
10 stories or how?
It went up 24 stories. The one I showed in the video was 24 stories. Yeah. And just to kind of give people an update on that whole issue, the whole thing right there, which is phenomenal. Like I said, we're talking about private space. SpaceX is clearly leading the way, the trailblazer of all things. There's a lot of others, but they're definitely the figurehead.
Yes.
But the Grasshopper, that's a test article in Texas, and they're testing it from the ground up in terms of that side. From what I hear, I could be wrong, so don't 100% quote me, but I'm 99% sure about this. The next, I think Elon said it in one of his press conferences, the next Falcon 9 launch, the first one out of Vandenberg, they're going to actually, after the first stage is done doing its job, obviously don't need it anymore, so might as well use it for something. They're going to actually test the upper end of that stuff for the reusability and turn that thing around, basically, ignite the engines again, proving you can reignite them in the air, and slow it down just a little bit, and then slow it down to where it doesn't hit the atmosphere as hard, and then effectively, quote unquote, without legs, land in the water. So, and then maybe they'll attempt to recover it too. See what
That's not really landing. That's splashing.
It's splashed down. That's what I said, land.
But get almost a free test of that rather than having to spend how many $1 million on a dedicated test flight.
Absolutely, exactly. That's exactly what it's a free
That's
test. It's brilliant. And depending on, I'm sure Elon always, for some things, he overdoes
the hype?
He hypes it, yes. He hypes things on a number of things, but he also, at the same time, says, hey, don't expect us to recover an engine for a few flights. A booster.
Yeah, because
he,
like you said, he's been very vocal. And
the
original thing was the first stage is recoverable.
Oh, yeah.
From day one, first stage is recoverable. And everything is off the shelf. We're we're going to save money by buying everything off the shelf, and now almost everything is built by them because they couldn't count on the off the shelf people.
If you want
so
it done right, you got to do it yourself.
Themselves, you know?
So, in fact, going along those lines, the tour that we had, one of the things they had I think it was a manufacturer that kept upping the price for their domes, basically. I think it was aluminum or something like that for the top of their domes. They kept upping the price on it. I guess what people typically do for that is like NASA. I think correct me if I'm wrong. So they carve it out. Is that what they usually do? Is it they carve out?
It depends on the piece, but yeah, carving out.
Since it's the dome, basically carve it out. But what they're doing is, I think, applying a little bit of heat and pushing it up, a slab of metal and pushing it up on their own instead of going third party for that. So,
well, which to me brings up another one of the big privates, Bigelow, which is Bezos. We don't really know anything because they're pretty secret.
You mean
Blue Origin?
Bigelow. Yeah.
Bigelow's
the inflatable.
Bigelow,
Bigelow
secret,
and Blue Origin are two really interesting ones to me because Bigelow, the inflatable space station. Does everybody know that there's 2 Bigelow modules in orbit right now?
And they're also.
They're going to take one up to the space station.
Yeah, that's what you saw that in the video too.
And they have tested the well, they're still surviving. They're still working, as far as I know. I guess I ought to go to the website.
Yeah, I think
they're not powered though.
Are they unpowered now?
Oh, they okay.
Okay, but they're still inflated because they have more capacity to take hits than the space station does. They have layers and layers in this inflatable, including Kevlar, and so they are more resistant to meteorite strikes than the space station is. And like they were saying, we are paying for a small module to be put onto the space station. But this is where the irony of it is. Bigelow got started with all of this because this was originally a NASA program. The Congress said, we're not going to fund anymore. And they cut it loose, and Bigelow said, hey, can I have it? And NASA basically said yes. And it's been spent. They built on what was already known, and they have built the vehicles or the modules. And but the space station was supposed to be built out of these kind of modules.
At least a part of it. Yeah.
And so here we are. We've come full circle. We started out with NASA, taken over by a private company. And now NASA's going to use the byproduct of all of that work.
Which is where many people want NASA to kind of start moving towards kind of like that model.
And then there was the Air Force under the Strategic Defense Initiative, Star Wars, built the DCX. Well, in fact, it wasn't even the Air Force, it was McDonnell Douglas, as a privately funded, in-house development vehicle for Star Wars, for SDI. And it was under the Air Force auspices, and that was another, again, learning from what's already been done. They went out, they had a trailer with no windows in it, that was mission control. They had some fuel trucks, they went out there to tank it up. And sometimes they had to get a push broom and brush the sand off of the concrete slab they were using out there. They didn't even build themselves a launch pad. There just was a slab of concrete out there they brushed off at Vandenberg, I think it was. And really, as little as money as possible program. And it was a vertical takeoff and landing vehicle. And it did several times. They did what they called translation, which is go up, go sideways, straighten up, land. And the idea was another rapid response, reusable vehicle, because the vision of some war somewhere in the future, the first attack will be our satellites. And we will want to get satellites back into replacement, whether the GPS or the spy satellites or whatever they are. We want to repopulate our constellations as quickly as possible. Of course, if there's so much debris, it may not be possible. But that was where it came from. And then everything kind of collapsed. It never really went very far as a program. The vehicle worked perfectly fine. They had, but again, shoestring. Shoestring, they had, because of no real facilities and kind of not thinking about things, they had a really calm day once they fueled up the vehicle. And of course, the tankage usually has some spillover. You got the bleed off. Here's the hydrogen bleeding off. Instead of the wind blowing it away, it was collecting inside the aeroshell of the vehicle. So they take off. They get, I can't remember if it was 100 feet or higher. The hydrogen lit off. Blew a section off the side of the aeroshell, and none of the data, none of the telemetry said they had an explosion.
Oops.
Yeah. Somebody got on a walkie-talkie and said, "Did you know it just blew up?" Oh, it blew up. Hit the abort. It aborted, landed. They went over and went, that's what happened. Slapped the pieces back on, flew it some more. The last flight was under NASA's jurisdiction. They took it over, and there was a period of time, you look old enough to know this. When the Soviet Union collapsed, we did a lot of government welfare to try to keep the old Soviet engineers and science programs paid so they wouldn't sell their stuff to people we didn't want to buy it. You know, atomic bomb stuff. Intercontinental ballistic missile stuff.
Small things.
Yeah, small things. And and I think it obviously was successful because we see that North Korea didn't get to buy any of that stuff. We're in better shape now. At the time, it seemed like idiocy, and I was one of the things I was massively against was inviting the Russians into the space station to make an alpha into the International Space Station. And boy, would that been a mistake not having them there.
Oh, we'd still probably be designing it right now.
And so they bought, I think it was a lithium tank and a composite tank. Composite tank for the oxygen, the lithium tank for the hydrogen. To put in lighter weight materials into the DCX, and that by then it was the DCX 1A, DC-1A.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah. When NASA took it over, it got a new name. And so, and of course it was DCX because McDonnell Douglas, DC, you know, they did DC-10s, DC-8s, you know, lit X for experimental. And so they put in these tanks and they flew several flights. Things went just fine. And the accident report, you see where this is leading up.
Great.
Guy opened up a panel, unhooked the hydraulics to get on the one landing strip to get over to where he needed to work. He worked on it, then closed the panel. And you'll see what I just said, there was a step left out in there, hooking back up the hydraulics. So it takes off, the hydraulic blades retract, it flies, comes down, 3 legs extend, 1 leg does not. The engine settles, and it just topples. And that was the end of the DCX program. But those people got hired by Mr. Bezos, Amazon, and now the Blue Origin group is out there in Texas doing something.
Something which seems like the same type of thing.
Yes.
Well, see,
with the same people.
well, I'm sure they'll learn from their mistakes.
And they have flown a bigger version.
Uh-huh.
They have flown something that has crashed. And,
Oh yeah, I remember that.
their program is, we're going to fly the first stage up so far, and whatever else is going to be expendable. And then the first stage is going to come down and land, and then the capsule is going to come back on a parachute. And they are thinking orbit. And now, from the other extreme, I think everybody's heard Virgin Galactic. But what a lot of people haven't heard of is Armadillo Aerospace. And I think they still have their gift shop where their motto is fly often, crash often, learn, fly again. And so they have what they call armadillo droppings, which is broken pieces of vehicles that have crashed that you can buy as a souvenir.
That's actually kind of funny.
And so what happened is they were part of the attempt to do the first people in space, private space.
For the X Prize.
For the X Prize. And they never came close.
But they kept going.
But they were volunteerism. And, not quite crowdsourcing because the crowd is only like 8 people. But they didn't get government money. They didn't go out for grants and things. The people who developed Doom, this is one of the developers of Doom.
Huh.
And he's still there. id Software, is that the right name? Yeah. Uh-huh. He's one of the main people of id Software, and it's basically was out of his pocket. And they have flown several times. I think actually probably over 100 times. They are the most flying private rocket company there is. Now, a lot of them have been small.
Oh,
yeah, but
this chair maybe.
Yeah, and
maybe a couple.
They have flown people about 2 foot off the ground in some of their tests. But the thing that captured my attention early on, they're not open as like they used to. But they told you everything. They didn't release their source code on their guidance and stuff, but pretty much everything else they told you.
That might have been illegal.
And what metals they were using, what processes they were using, how they overcame this. But the thing that really hit me was the video that they call the big crash. They had a hydrogen peroxide rocket, and they used a catalyst. Now, hydrogen peroxide we get a few percent hydrogen peroxide in solution. This is like 90% hydrogen peroxide. Hits the catalyst, it breaks down, and of course, hydrogen peroxide is H3O instead of H2O. So when you break bonds with a catalyst like that, you produce heat and water. So what do you get with heat and water? Steam. So they had a steam rocket. I think the steampunk people ought to love aerospace because they built a steam rocket. And they're out there in the field flying this vehicle. And again, they tell about all of this stuff in their blogging and everything. The catalyst was fracturing, and they didn't know it. There was pieces of catalyst being blown around on every flight. And to get it up to a right temperature, they had to dump a certain amount of fuel onto the catalyst. Well, more and more of the catalyst was missing, so they were dumping more and more fuel. They didn't have a fuel gauge. This is real bare bones rocketry. They didn't have a fuel gauge. They didn't know how much fuel they were using. So they finally get up to the temperature they need. They take off. Now, the engine is sputtering because of the catalyst damage. The parameters in the software go, okay, if we are exceeding this limit and delta V going up, then we have to throttle down. Well, because of the sputtering, it would thrust really good, hit the limit, throttle down, just at the time that it was losing thrust anyway. So now it was too much the other way, so it's now falling. Bam! Throttle up. Bam! Bam! Well, this pogo went above where they wanted to go, and they were about ready to try to land it. Again, a vertical takeoff and landing vehicle when it ran out of fuel. at about 500 feet. And they got this video, and you can hear the wind whistling.
Classic.
It hits, boom! just like you dropped a bell on the middle of this field.
I have to go look at the video.
You gotta pull that up. And of course, after that, they weren't real fond of hydrogen peroxide catalyst engines any longer because they could never figure out how to keep the catalyst intact. And it was tough getting the hydrogen peroxide. Well, here they launched, what was it, February, the last one, out of Spaceport America in New Mexico.
I think they're one of the only ones using it right now.
That's right. This multi-million-dollar fancy complex for Virgin Galactic, and these poor guys out of Texas that are finally getting paid. They're now a business.
Oh. Always nice.
It's always nice, isn't it? Because after the X Prize, the X committee went, hey, we've got to do something else. They are doing other things, but in space. And so they did the Lunar Lander Challenge.
Yep.
And the first year that the Pixel was ready, first you gotta love people who call a vehicle Pixel. They're heading out to New Mexico. They get stopped at the way station at the New Mexico border. Well, you got to have a commercial driver's license. No, we're unemployed people driving a truck, and we're not driving it for our company because they were still volunteerism back then. So, hey, we're not going to let you go. We're going to give you all these fines and everything. You're impounded. So the guy called the head of the people putting on the space festival in New Mexico, which they were the star attraction. Everything else was going to be booths and replicas and stuff. Here was going to be something that hopefully would fly and
at least make some nice boom.
Safe boom. And so he called him, who just so happened to be the governor of New Mexico, and he said, "You should have seen the look on the state trooper's face when he gets this phone call from the governor of the state saying, 'Let these people go.'" He took them to where they needed to go.
That was nice of him. He wanted his job.
And again, no other company, I believe, tells you so much of what's going on. But they lost the last Lunar Lander Challenge. For the very simple reason is they flew first. They did the whole challenge under the existing rules. Maston, which basically has built a small, another version of Armadillo's stuff by reading Armadillo's blogs and actually talking to them. And that at one point this was a much more community effort. And so they flew, they did not succeed. They flew, they did not succeed. They were out of time. The committee people got together and said, well, you know, Armadillo won level 1 last year, and this is level 2, so maybe we ought to give these guys another chance because we're never going to do this again. So they gave them another chance, and they succeeded on the third try, which was not in the rules. And they decided, again, not in the rules, that the second guys won, even though Armadillo flew first and flew it correctly and within the time period, that they came closer to the bullseye on the third unruled flight and gave them the money instead of Armadillo. Armadillo took the high road and said, hey, this is what they want to do. Okay, we won the first one. We got other things in the fire. We're going to just move on. And have since then become almost silent. They're not telling everything that they do, except on Stig A and Stig B, which are back to the more traditional kind of rockets that we're used to. They have flown Stig A. Unfortunately, their recovery system hasn't worked so well, and so they're no longer flying Stig A. We may be able to buy pieces of it now, I don't know. Stig B, they had a problem because they wanted to roll the aluminum to build the tanks. But they couldn't find the sheets of aluminum large enough in the United States. He said, the way he put it was, everybody has it in their catalog. Nobody has it in stock. So they had to buy these sheets of aluminum to build the tanks from Europe. And so they built the tanks and built this larger rocket. I think it was the first time they flew, the recovery system worked properly. It didn't fly as high as they wanted. It's one of the rectangular controllable parachutes. They flew within 100 feet of where they took off, back against the wind, tacking and everything. They show the track, and it's this big spaghetti kind of thing as it's using the wind currents and things to come down there. They got the video of it. Here it comes, and it just kind of lays over as it touches down. And the third one, though, the recovery system didn't work right. They now have no vehicle again and are working on the next time. And so that's where they're at. But they probably will be putting things into space here pretty soon, too.
One thing I'm really looking forward to, kind of not trying to change the topic, but
No.
is Inspiration Mars. It's not really, it's private, but it's not for profit.
Right.
It's not a non-profit. Are you guys all familiar with Inspiration Mars?
No.
Are you?
Yes.
Oh, you are? Okay. Inspiration Mars basically is a nonprofit started by Dennis Tito, of all people. He was the first space tourist, and now they are planning on sending 2 people, as the video said, a man or a woman. I think it's beyond childbearing age. So I think they made that clear in the video too, and in the press conference. But to fly by Mars, and not just any time, but using a special trajectory that only comes around once every 15, 20 years, and that will be coming around in 2018. So launching January 2018, and basically the difference here is not just some guy saying, "Oh, I'm going to do this." He's got money.
Yes.
And he's at least backing it out of pocket for the next 2 years. And he's going to be trying to finance it, and that's where he made his millions, was in the financing world. So it's one thing to watch out for. We might have people, potentially, flying around Mars. It'll be very ragtag. About as ragtag as you can get. About as ragtag as you can get, flying around Mars, 500 days, in a life support system that's designed with like the old cars, basically. I think you call it like a 1950s style Chevy of life support systems or something like that, where it's simple and you work on it and very little automation, so you'll spend a lot of your time cleaning and repairing. Keeping yourself alive, yes, for 500 days.
They'll have to be pretty trained on a lot of stuff.
Oh, they'll have to
be
be.
very easy communication.
Oh no, exactly. It'll just be those 2, and they'll have
Well,
the.
that brings up a good point. Has
Oh,
everybody
like a
heard?
black box.
Yeah. Has everybody heard about 3D printing?
Yes.
They're going to test it
that's
on
deep
the space
space.
station.
Oh, that they are. Oh, that's awesome. Deep Space Industries that's one of their things.
Yeah, that's what they're relying on. I mean, they're basically relying on just in situ processing, getting on your asteroid, and then extracting it out using their patent pending, I guess, technique to do some metallurgy, low gravity part.
So why send people or robotics there when you can just send your printer there per se?
Yeah.
Refine the raw materials, put the raw materials.
Of course, that was one of the original ideas of the moon base. Because you put a railgun out there, you use solar energy to energize it, and you can just fling things off of the moon into orbits and then utilize them in building. Well, at least at one time they were talking about the energy space satellite, the gigantic microwave, being energy back through microwaves and stuff. In fact, that was another McDonnell Douglas thing. And I don't know if they took it. I think what happened, is they designed this truss building system where you would take rolled aluminum, strips of aluminum rolled up, and they would pull out these strips of aluminum, shape them, and attach them into trusses to build the solar power satellite. And I look at that and I go, that's what they're doing siding and gutters with now. And I've always wondered if they're somebody went, wow, if they can do that, we can do this.
There you go, legacy technology. All of it is going to your gutters.
Really touching home.
For anybody else there, is there any particular new space company that they might have heard in the news that they're interested in finding more information about?
Or that you're particularly well versed in? Not sure. I know I've heard something on Twitter here. Actually, it was yesterday. I guess they did a glide test on Spaceship 2 where they actually had the engine up and running and they were pumping fuel through the system.
Oh, yeah.
I think they announced that last night on Yuri's night in LA.
Yeah, probably did.
Yeah.
So with that test out of the way, obviously the next step would be to probably do it a couple more times and then actually ignite it. So.
Which is why I mentioned earlier that it's an unofficial space race between XCOR and the Lynx and the Virgin Galactic and all that stuff. So they're planning on firing their engines.
And of course, Lynx really isn't going to space.
It's going to suborbital space.
It's going 50 miles up.
Oh.
It's not going to 63.
It's not.
Another 50 kilometers, which I guess
100 kilometers, which basically makes it 63.
Yeah.
They're going to the Air Force space. They're not going to.
I did not know that. I do know they're eventually going to have a module on top where they can set a small CubeSat base.
Right. But the end result is that for about less than half the galactic price, you'll get almost the same amount of time of microgravity, and you'll still get to see the curvature of the Earth.
About just as well.
And you'll feel just as good. And
the only difference
which is always what was funny, because the Air Force called it, because the Air Force decided on 50 miles because their definition was when you get up high enough and the atmosphere is thin enough that your control surfaces don't work, you're in space.
Might as well be.
And so the X-15 went over 50 miles several times, so they were the first people in space by Air Force definition before Yuri ever went up.
Yuri was also the first person in orbit.
That's right.
That's the big difference.
And they also, I think everybody looks at 63 miles, 100 kilometers now. That's
the universal worldwide standard.
Even though there's no real standard, that's really what a lot of people look at.
In my opinion, you're not really in space until you're orbiting. but it's still good to do this. I'm not trying to.
You're right.
Belittle these guys because it's definitely important what they're doing.
And talking about business as being space, this is what there is this huge hunger for microgravity time for experiments, and that's what's fueling a lot of the interest beyond the first 500 people who can afford to do these things. There is just billions of dollars of experiments that are waiting to go that they can get, because once Virgin Galactic has no person to be able to fly on, afford to fly on there or enter, well, there's a lot of people who can afford it.
Yes.
But once the interest is, if the interest ever ends for Virgin Galactic taking people, and the Lynx taking people, and Dream Chaser taking people, and all the others, they're going to cram these things full of experiments. And in fact, Dragon Lab goes up this year.
I don't think it's this year. Definitely not this year.
In
the next couple of years at least.
Because that was one of the things that I think kind of shocked them when they sold out of the first Dragon Lab within, what was it, a day?
Something like that.
Because they were new to the business. They did not understand how much people wanted to participate in microgravity experiments. And that's one of these things that even if you don't go into orbit, there is significant microgravity time to do experiments.
Well, the thing is, you're getting essentially the same microgravity experiments that you have on the station as you would on these suborbital flights. And most of the experiments that do run on the station are only running for a few seconds or a few minutes because they're just trying to mix chemicals or whatever to see what the result is. So if you fly on one of these suborbital flights that are 5 minutes long, all you've got to have is somebody on board to just basically activate it and then shut it off.
Or even just remote control button.
Yeah. And
if you can communicate with the ship, you can probably communicate with that button.
and so you're getting the same experiments done that would be on the station for a significant fraction of the cost.
And that's where Maston and Armadillo and Virgin Galactic and I think even Bigelow and Lynx and Dream Chaser and all those guys are looking at all of these as ways to close the business solution to make enough money to keep going.
One thing to keep an eye on, though, which will be, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with what's called the Bannister effect or not. Is somebody
That doesn't click now.
No, the Bannister effect is not a space term or anything like that, but basically, just to be real basic here, Roger Bannister. Okay, Roger Bannister. She apparently knows. He was the for 2, 4, 8,000. Basically, as long as people wanted to make records, running, they were always trying to do equivalent, our equivalents of a 4-minute mile. The Greeks tried it. Everybody tried it for thousands of years. They couldn't do it. They tried everything, shaving completely every single thing you could possibly think of. But finally, Roger Bannister, in the 50s, finally did. I forgot exactly what his technique was. I think it was basically running in somebody's wake, basically as well. Well, so basically tag team, because he knew he could run a 1/4 mile in a minute. Is that what it was? Yeah. So a 1/4 mile in under a minute or something like that. So surely he should be able to do it just 4-minute mile. And so he just had 2 people basically tag team. And then that last 1/4 mile, his partner had collapsed and fell, but he kept running and he made it under 4 minutes. But the Bannister effect shows that within that same year, like 5 or 6 or more other people did it. Mm-hmm. But the point I'm making is if and when, hopefully when, SpaceX completely, makes their rockets, at least shows that they can be reusable in the way they're designing them right now, other people will follow. Because if they can get their rockets down to the cost of fuel.
Did you hear the latest on SpaceX? They have gotten permission to start looking at someplace down in the southeast to build it.
Yeah, I do know that they're wanting to build a spaceport. Well, they're looking at a couple of places, but it sounds like the lead candidate is Texas.
This is a different place. I think it's South Carolina or something.
Oh, an additional place. Oh, I didn't hear that.
Because what they were looking for is that where they were talking about building it, they would close down the beach during launches.
Ah, gotcha.
And the local government said that they would agree to that. So now
is that like within the last couple of days?
This was like yesterday. It was yesterday when I read it.
Oh, I was busy working on so I did not hear that. That's sad, actually, because that would have been a good place.
But apparently there was some worry about, there were certain trajectories that if things went wrong, they would land on.
You got to worry about people. I understand that. I can understand that. But regardless, though, when they make their Falcon reusable, if it just cost, I think he said the cost of fuel is $200,000 for a $65 million rocket. Mm-hmm. It's like a normal airplane, basically, at that point. Yeah. Rounded up for profit, $500 million, divided by, say, 7 people. $500,000 by 7 people. I mean, you and I could afford to go and just take out a mortgage. all small.
Well, see, that's one of the things that amazed me when I took the future astronaut course. They have a 3G centrifuge. I always thought that was going to be the point where I can't look at doing anything. But 3G is in the reclining seat that they would have you in. 3G, and that's what Virgin Galactic's running at is 3G.
Most things
3G is not hard to take.
No, it's not. Some people can, obviously, for health reasons.
And that was another thing that happened with Virgin Galactic. One of the first things that they did was start testing people about their health. And they have proven that it's like 97% of their people that have put down the deposit
can do it.
Are healthy enough to fly. Yeah. Which they were thinking it was going to be more like 80%. So they were delighted.
I'm sure they were. But
just to jump in, it's 11 o'clock. So
okay.
We've been on this topic for an hour. Per schedule, we take them out till like 11:30.
There you go.
If you want to keep going.
That's true.
I think we wanted the museum.
Yeah, I'm sure.
This museum time in here at least for an hour and a half.
They come back here at a lot.